After the single most destructive war in all of human history, Europe had to do way more than just rebuild its cities. It had to rebuild its entire idea of democracy. So today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of how a continent in total ruins reinvented its own rulebook, building what you could call constitutional fortresses, all to protect freedom for generations to come.
Just try to imagine the scene in 1945. The continent wasn't just damaged, it was shattered. Physically, sure, but also politically. The democracies they had before the war, with all their big promises, had just completely and utterly failed. They turned out to be way too weak, too fragile, and they just collapsed into fascism, Nazism, and war. A new beginning wasn't just, a nice idea. It was an absolute desperate necessity.
And right away, that new beginning slammed into a massive wall, the Iron Curtain. Suddenly, Europe was split right down the middle. Over in the east, you had the Soviet bloc, with socialist states all built on communist ideology. For them, the state was everything. Power was totally unified, and individual rights, well, they always came second to what the state needed. But in the West, they started a totally different kind of experiment. They set out to build a new brand of liberal democracy, one that was tough enough to protect itself from the very things that had just tried to destroy it. And this led them to what is probably the single most important question they had to face. They had all seen it with their own eyes, how democratic elections and popular votes had been twisted to put totalitarian regimes in power. So the question was, how do you design a democracy that can't commit suicide? How do you actually stop the people themselves from choosing a path that leads straight to tyranny? The answer they found was, it was a totally radical new way of thinking. And it's captured perfectly by an ancient Greek myth. The main idea was that to save democracy, you first had to be honest about its own weaknesses. And this is where we get this incredible metaphor. Think about the story of Ulysses from the Odyssey. He knew he couldn't resist the deadly, enchanting song of the sirens. So what was his solution? He made his crew tie him to the mast of his ship so he couldn't steer it into the rocks. In pretty much the same way, the people of post-war Europe realized they needed to chain themselves to the mast of a strong constitution. They willingly agreed to limit their own power, to stop themselves from being lured onto the rocks of authoritarianism sometime in the future. And the practical way to do this, the actual tool for the job, was this idea of constitutional rigidity. This concept is absolutely central to the whole post-war project. What it means is you create a constitution that's really, really hard to change. It's not like a regular law that a simple majority can just vote out on a whim. The whole point is to make the fundamental rules of the democratic game super stable and secure, protecting them from the passions of the moment. So, with this new philosophy in mind, Western European nations rolled up their sleeves and got to work. But here's the thing. They didn't all come up with the same answer. Instead, 3 of the biggest countries, Italy, Germany, and France, each developed their own unique blueprint for building a stronger, more resilient, you might even say armored, democracy. Let's take a look at each one. All right, first up, Italy. After 2 decades of Mussolini's fascism, the country was just deeply, deeply fractured. So their 1948 constitution wasn't about one grand vision. Nope, it was a messy, hard-fought compromise that was really designed just to hold a divided nation together. And the challenges they faced were just immense. You had these incredibly powerful communist and socialist parties on one side and the Christian Democrats on the other. Nobody trusted anybody. And the biggest fear, the thing that kept everyone up at night, was that any single person with too much power could become the next dictator. So their number one goal was to design a system that would spread power out as much as humanly possible. So what was their solution? It was this highly balanced system. They intentionally designed the government to be a little bit weak, to be really reliant on getting a broad consensus for anything. This made it super hard for any one leader to dominate. And to balance that, they created something new for Italy, a really powerful constitutional court. This court would be the ultimate guardian of the Constitution, the supreme referee between all the squabbling political groups. Okay, now let's hop over to Germany, where the approach was even more precise. If Italy's constitution was about compromise, Germany's 1949 Basic Law, the Grundgesetz, was a direct, point-by-point response to a very specific trauma, the catastrophic failure of the Weimar Republic that let Hitler rise to power in the first place. The folks writing Germany's new constitution basically had a checklist of disasters they had to prevent. The old Weimar system was just a mess of political fragmentation. Dozens of tiny parties made a stable government totally impossible. Governments were collapsing constantly. The president abused emergency powers. And, most critically, anti-democratic parties like the Nazis actually used the rules of democracy to tear it down from the inside. Their key innovation to solve this was, honestly, it's ingenious. It's called the constructive vote of no confidence. Now, here's how it works. The parliament can't just vote to fire the chancellor and create a crisis. Nope. To remove a chancellor, they have to, in the very same vote, agree on who the new chancellor will be, and they need an absolute majority to do it. This one little mechanism is incredibly powerful. It forces the opposition to actually form a real alternative government before they can tear the current one down. It basically engineers stability right into the system and prevents those deadly power vacuums. And they added another layer of armor. Germany created this concept of a militant democracy. What this does is it gives its powerful constitutional court the authority to actually ban political parties if their goals are to overthrow the democratic system. The message was crystal clear. Democracy does not have to be a suicide pact. It can and it absolutely should defend itself. And finally, let's look at France. Now, France's problem wasn't a history of one big dictator. It was a long, long history of having a weak, paralyzed state. The Fourth Republic they set up after the war was famously unstable. It was so bad it led to a constitutional crisis that brought the war hero Charles de Gaulle back to power in 1958 to fix it.
I mean, the Fourth Republic was a total mess. Governments were forming and then collapsing, sometimes in a matter of weeks. Parliament was gridlocked, completely unable to deal with huge challenges like the war for independence in Algeria. The real problem at the core was a historically weak executive that was just completely at the mercy of a bickering, fragmented legislature. De Gaulle was brought in to fix this, once and for all.
And de Gaulle's solution was radical, at least for France. The 1958 Constitution created a brand new semi-presidential system. This set up a powerful, directly elected president as the head of state, someone with real executive power, working alongside a prime minister who handles the day-to-day government. The goal was simple: create a strong, stable executive who could actually lead the nation and finally break that endless cycle of paralysis. So there you have it. 3 different countries facing 3 different sets of problems, and they came up with 3 unique solutions. And this is the important part, when you take a step back, you can see that they were all working from a new, shared blueprint for what modern European democracy should look like. So, just to recap real quick, Italy used a balanced system and a powerful court to manage its deep divisions. Germany used its armored democracy and that clever vote of no confidence to guarantee stability. And France created a strong presidency to overcome paralysis. Each tool was custom-made for the job, but they were all part of the exact same fundamental project.
And here's the shared DNA that came out of all this. Today, almost all modern European constitutions are rigid and hard to change. They all have powerful constitutional courts to act as watchdogs. They have long, detailed lists of fundamental rights. They have mechanisms built right in to keep the government stable. And they're open to international law, which was a direct rejection of the aggressive nationalism that started the war. This became the go-to model, not just for them, but later for the democratic transitions in Greece, Portugal, and Spain, and then all across Eastern Europe.
So these brilliant constitutional designs were a direct answer to the horrors of the 20th century. They were built to stop the threats of that era. But today, we're facing a whole new set of challenges, from digital misinformation and rising populism to huge geopolitical shifts. And that leaves us with a really crucial question. Is the armor that was forged back in 1948 still strong enough to protect democracy today?